Okay. All right. Well, first of all, thank you for everyone who's attended or is attending. The purpose of tonight's webinar is just to share some broader, I guess you'd call it mindset, psychology, philosophy, views that have helped me, schools of thought that have helped me and have helped many, many other people, and just sort of expose you guys to it, have a bit of a discussion about it, get your thoughts. But a lot of these principles are both in line with the Upfront Fitness mission, the direction that I'm sort of taking the business, and being exposed to some of these schools of thought have actually shaped that direction for me. So as we go through this, you'll see some of the things that have influenced me along the way, and we'll have small bits of discussion about it as we go along. So I'm going to keep this presentation relatively simple. This is my introduction to, I guess, Stoicism and something called individual psychology, which was coined by a psychologist named Alfred Adler, and he was alive and practicing psychology around the same time as Freud, I believe, and he had a very different sort of competing school of thought. And both of these schools of thought, Stoicism and individual psychology, seem to complement each other rather well. They've had a big impact on me, so we're going to go through it. Now, first and foremost, disclaimer, I'm not an expert on these subjects. I'm still very, very beginner at them. But I'm beginner enough, and it's had enough of an impact on me that, again, I just want to expose you guys to it and share with you. So, first of all, Stoicism is not just from the old Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, but he is one of the more better known Stoics, so we're sort of starting with him. So this is a nice little sculpture of Marcus Aurelius. So Stoicism is essentially a philosophy that teaches emotional control, rational thinking, and virtue. So the core idea is you don't control what happens to you, only how you respond. So the things you do have control over, you have a responsibility to be diligent and to make the most of those few things in life you do have control over. And those things that you don't have control over, you need to learn how to let them go and how to move on. Okay? Now, there are a number of key principles of Stoicism, which we're going to sort of go into. One thing that's fascinating as I read Meditations, which is a great book, I'm going to recommend that later. Meditations, which is a collection of thoughts essentially by Marcus Aurelius. As I read that, I realize, and this was written thousands of years ago, as I read that, I realize human beings have not changed much in thousands of years. Our technology has changed, cultures have changed, but who we are, how we think, how our brains are, you can read Meditations and be like, this could have been written yesterday. Like, it applies to today, and I find that rather compelling and quite encouraging. Yay, Joel's here. Welcome, Joel. We're just covering Stoicism. So, that's Stoicism in a nutshell. Then we've got Alfred Adler. So the only book that's been influenced by Alfred Adler that I've read is something called The Courage to be Disliked, which is written as a conversational, hello Joel, which is written as a conversational sort of format between a philosopher / like university lecturer and a student. And the whole book is just a conversation between these two people. But it's a great introduction to individual psychology. So a brief sort of definition of it is a psychological school of thought around personal responsibility, self-improvement, and social connection. So already you guys can probably see the influence this has had on me. So the core idea is your past does not define you, but your choices do. So some of the key principles, we're going to go into this a little bit more, but some of the key principles are things like the separation of tasks, community feeling, and senses of inferiority and superiority in a culture. So we're going to sort of look at that. Now, one of Adler's quotes, or is quoted as saying, the meaning of life is not something you discover, but something you create. So the reason I've sort of picked these, again, Stoicism helps you stay mentally strong, act with integrity, and control your emotions. And individual psychology teaches you responsibility, grow from challenges, and willingly undertake challenges while building meaningful connections. So that's the gist. So this is part of the core Upfront Fitness, I'm going to have to change that name eventually, philosophy. For those who can't see at the moment, I don't know what kind of diagram you'd call this. For those who can't see, picture a big circle. big circle with another circle in it, with another circle in it, with another circle in it, and they all have different headings, right? So it's kind of, we're starting with broader society and working into the self. So how many layers are there? Our 5 layers are, we've got mankind as a whole, and then you've got your countrymen. This is the best one I could sort of find, the best graph representation. Anyway, your countrymen, which is sort of like your national responsibility. Fellow citizens, which is like your neighborhood, the immediate city, culture, region that you live in, the family unit, and then the self, mind and body. So part of my belief system is that as we, as men, improve and as we work on ourselves, we do so at all of these levels. Now you can start with the self, or you can start with your responsibility to people in general. But I'm a big fan of, when I sort of look at broader society, I think the best changes we've seen historically are not from the top down. They're not from governments legislating change on the people. They're from the bottom up, the people, the culture change, and that influences government. And so I think the more just generally better men that we have, more competent, rational, serving men in the community, the better our country is, right? So we sort of go through these layers. I think as we become better people, we help humanity as a whole. We help our fellow Australians. We help people in our local Sydney area. We especially help our family by being more competent, resilient, mentally and physically men. And ultimately, we help ourselves. So I think there's arguments at all 5 of these levels, all 5 of these layers, for why men should be working at trying to improve ourselves and striving to be the best versions of ourselves possible. So I do think there's responsibility in there for trying to earn a good amount of money as far as we're capable of as individuals. Money is a fantastic tool to be as physically competent as possible, to be emotionally competent, to work on all these facets and areas that men are required to do well at. I think if we can strive to be good in all those areas, it's good for us. So, next level. We've got what are called the 10 Stoic principles. So, hopefully you guys can see these. I'm just going to run through some of these really briefly because it's relatively short. But I've found these really helpful. If you want to come back to the replay later and have a look at these or just look this up, then that's fine. This is a wonderful image by Veronique Barrett. I'm not quite sure how to say her name properly. I think that's right. This is a good summary of a lot of the core Stoicism tenets. So as you read like Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, a lot of these kind of come through. So in a moment, what I'm going to get you guys to do is anyone who wants to unmute and share any of these that sort of resonate with you, that'd be great. But for now, I'm just going to quickly read them out. So I'm not going to... I might read the little blurb underneath, but I'll do it quickly. So the first one is perception is power. Your reality is shaped by your perception. So essentially, the point being made there is how you choose to look at things has a tremendous impact. That doesn't mean you can, through sheer naive optimism, if you're in a really shit situation. Like, has anyone seen that meme of the little person with the house on fire saying, "This is fine"? That's right. Everyone's seen that meme. That's not what they're talking about here. It's looking at situations with a different perspective that brings control back to you so you can do something about the situation. As soon as you feel like your life is out of your control, that's where things get harder. The next one is actions over words. That speaks for itself. So doing more rather than talking more. The next one is the obstacle is the way. So that's a really crude sort of summary of Stoic sort of thinking, but it aligns with this idea of when we are faced with challenges and adversity, that is where we typically experience the most growth. So if you think about your own life, how many of you experienced the most growth when things were easy? And how many of you experienced your most growth and progress as a person, career, whatever it is, when things got tough, when there was a challenge to overcome? So when I have the opportunity to talk to young people, when I'm talking to the young boys especially, I'm like, how many of you want to play a video game where you start out at a level 100 and you one-shot every boss? And they're all like, that sounds like an awful game. Because there is no challenge, there is no satisfaction in leveling up, right? And so this is, I think, for humans in general, but especially for men, I think this is a core facet of being men, which is one of my issues with video games, having had problems with them myself, is that video games can without realizing it, take that part of our brain and apply it to something that doesn't impact our lives positively at all. And we lose that fire for the real fight in life, which might be career and relationships and family. The next one, accept what you cannot control. So again, looking at your life, your situation, how much can you control and mastering those realms of control. And the areas that you can't, and this is hard. I'm not going to say I've mastered this, but the areas you can't control, practicing how to let them go. It is very difficult. The next one is reflect and react. Again, these are all very like oversimplified summaries of Stoic thought. It becomes a little bit more nuanced when you read the books or like the Seneca letters. But the principle is there of don't act hastily. Try and think about what you're doing. Make an assessment before you react. So just be a little bit slow. A little bit slower with some of your reactions. Embrace discomfort. I've made that point. Practice gratitude, another one that I'm not particularly good at, but yes, take stock of the situation you're in. One thing I have noticed that Marcus Aurelius does in Meditations is he keeps death at the forefront of his mind, in the sense of, he's like, death comes really quickly. He's living in a time where people don't live to be very old. Keep in mind, this was like 180 AD or something like that. But he's like, people die by the sword, people die by plague, people die by accident. Even if you make it to a ripe old age, you are still going to die. Like, life goes remarkably quickly. So as you go along, try to be mindful of being grateful for what you do have, which can be really hard. I know that can be really, really hard in today's day and age, but I mean, feel free to lecture me about this because I'm not good at it. But practice gratitude for what we do have, so that we have more of that inner peace. One thing that's not written here that I do like about Meditations is Marcus Aurelius continues to make the case, your mind should be your fortress. If you're going to have one place of solitude that you can go to, it should be your mind. And this is why when I talk to you guys, especially the young guys here, when we're training for looks and aesthetics and we're looking for that external validation, that is okay to a point, but just be really careful. Be really, really careful with that, because it can go so far to the other direction. You're no longer grateful. You're no longer enjoying the process. It's all about the outcome, and you lose sight of what you're doing all this for, especially if you don't end up getting to where you want, or it just becomes all-consuming. So just be careful of the goals that you do elect to pick and why you've got them. That's why I talk about this stuff, because some of them can be really unhealthy. And so following on from that, we're nearly done with this section. Lead from within, which again is like that your mind should be a place of solitude, not turmoil. I certainly have not mastered that. That's the one that resonates most with me. View from above, this is similar to perception is power. It's like, look at a situation like you're above the situation, like you're analyzing it rather than being in the throes of it. And the last one, I thought that was number one. No, I already did lead by example, I think. So yeah, walk the walk. Don't just talk, essentially. All right, before I move on to the next section, does anyone want to unmute? Does anyone want to say anything or ask any questions? Did anything stand out to you in those principles? Good hustle, guys. All right, moving on. So Adlerian psychology. So these are some of the key points I got from the book. The courage to be disliked. The next one is the courage to be happy, which is quite good. And so these are sort of the top 5 points I got from it. So we've got the separation of tasks, which what that essentially means is, I actually don't like the definition that's written here. The separation of tasks is when you're having conflict with someone or in any situation that involves another person, weigh up whose responsibility is whose in this engagement and go no further than where your responsibility lies. So if someone else is getting upset and getting angry and flying off the handle, that is their task. That is their responsibility. Yours is yours. Theirs is theirs. If people choose to come to the table, that's up to them. If people choose to become a client with me, if they choose to go for their walks or log their food or do their training or engage with the process, that is up to them. I cannot control that. My task is to try and guide and offer advice to the best degree that I can. It is the client's task to take that advice, work with me, and do their side of things. Right? That's just a clear-cut example. But this can really help with conflict. This can help with doing well in work and relationships and with kids, is clearly understanding whose responsibility is whose in this situation, to what extent. So I highly recommend the book because the book does a better job of sort of explaining it, but the separation of tasks is a really, really interesting concept. The next one is self-reliance. So one thing that Adler was really big on is the purpose of education in particular is self-reliance. So you're educating people correctly when they have the ability to do more for themselves. Now, thankfully, I was already onto this when I started coaching the way that I coach. But I'm sure you guys can see this worked into my program. A huge element of my coaching is I'm trying to teach you guys how to do a lot of these things for yourself to the day you drop dead. So you understand how weight loss works. So you understand energy balance and nutrition and protein and how to train and avoid injury or rehab stuff. Like I try and go through all these things. One of the key points of Adlerian psychology, number 3 here, is inferiority and superiority. One good thing about Adler is he recognizes that all humans are competing with one another to some degree, but what he tries to do is shift our thinking from competition to cooperation and see everyone around us as equals, as brothers, as sisters, and people that are here, we're here to help one another. And when we feel these moments of inferiority, that's our brain telling us, hey, there's an area you could be doing better. So try and accept yourself and recognize the area of inferiority and work on it. Same with superiority. If you go too deep into the ego side of things, recognize that, accept where you are, and do what you can to regain some level of humility and perspective. So it's a really interesting concept when you realize a lot of the things that we say and do and our thoughts and the way we're motivated is by comparing ourselves to others. And we do that normally. If you've got a job, I compare myself to other PTs. Michael's an electrician. I'm sure he's gone through periods of comparing his skill set to other electricians. We do these things all the time. And in my lived experience, I can spiral into a pit of depression over that. There's a whole history of things back there, but that's a huge amount of inferiority. So before it turns into a complex, recognize the areas that you might feel inferior, work on the areas that need working on, and discard the areas that are just you being too hard or too silly with yourself. One of the core tenets in the Courage to Be Happy is this concept of universal love, which actually feels like a very Christian biblical sort of thing, because it's a type of love. This is a little bit of a tangent, but it makes a really good point I want you guys to think about. This is a hard one to get your head around, I think. The type of love we're talking about here for other people is, in the Greek, ancient Greek, what's known as agape. So I'm actually going to skip ahead because this is a little bit of history for you, but this is really interesting. The Greeks have 4 primary different kinds of love, and there's 3 other types. But I'm going to go through the 4 primary types of love because I think they do a better job of delineating between the types of affection than we do. And there is a point to this, so just bear with me. So we will say, I love my cat, I love my guitar, I love my spouse, I love my kids. They are 4 different kinds of love. 4 different kinds of affection. And so I think it's useful to sort of break them down to wrap our head around them. So I'm actually going to start at the bottom here. I'm going to start with number 4, which is storge. Storge or storge? I think it's storge, something like that. Anyway, that is your family. That's your protective love. That's your instinctive, I will jump in front of a car to protect my child, kind of that defensive sort of protective love. The next one is eros, and you can probably guess where that one comes from. That's the erotic, that's the passionate, that's the romantic love, that's the desire. You certainly do not have that for your cat. I sure as shit hope not. The next one is philia. I'm probably butchering the pronunciations here, but that is deep friendship, brotherhood. Already you guys know that these are different kinds of love and different kinds of affection. The reason I'm making this point is the last one, agape, is this selfless, unconditional, it's this humble, dutiful, general sort of affection for anyone and everyone you come across. It's a very Christian, biblical sort of, goes into it a lot with my history of that, but it is also the kind of love that's discussed in some elements of Adlerian psychology. The reason I find that one really interesting is the more you approach people with this kind of affection for people that you meet, it does produce a kind of peace in you when you can foster that. So I'm certainly no expert at this. But the Stoic tie-in is the Stoics are very big on serving humanity, serving the broader society. You have a very big duty to the rest of the people around you as far as Stoicism goes. Do the best you can to serve the people around you, and you will be rewarded. That's essentially the point. So I expose you guys to that, just something for you to think about. All right, little rest break. We're nearly done. I just wanted to go through this stuff. Does anyone have anything that's standing out? Any thoughts? Was this worth doing? I got a thumbs up from Nick, so that's something. If anyone wants to say anything, jump in. Otherwise, I will keep moving. Cool.
I have something to say, actually.
Yes. Thanks, Nick.
So, a couple of topics back, tying in ironically with what you were saying, things being out of your control, learning to accept them, but then also on the other hand, the element of like, funnily enough, where that selflessness comes into it, are still sort of, how do you say, making your contribution. A perfect and perhaps nice and humorous example is our relationship and constant talks about squat shoes. Like, I was very headstrong for the entirety of our training, coaching time that, hey, I can just put plates under my feet. Now, what's the word here? That's not necessarily wrong. Subjectively, sure, I might be right. But for the sake of efficiency, for the sake of like what would work best, the squat shoes, which I've now come to accept, and like I've told you, I'm looking for, it's like I'm having to fiddle with these plates so much, it's ending up becoming a hindrance rather than something that helps.
Yeah.
So it's like you've done your part, but at the same time, you're like, look, you do what you're going to do, dude. It's your problem, not mine. But I recommend squat shoes. It's like you're accepting that Nick's stubborn as hell. I'm just letting him know, and it's up to him. That's my responsibility. The tasks we're talking about, it's up to me.
Yeah.
And I'm taking responsibility for that now. But like you also did a really good job of just like, instead of being like fully pestering and whatever, it's like, squat shoes every now and then. Oh damn, my feet don't feel too good. Squat shoes, like subtly. And it's working. It's worked out. I've realized I'm like, okay, these shoes are definitely the way to go because I'm actually getting annoyed now. Not at Ryan, at myself, because I'm making things harder.
Well, like me, Nick, you learn a lot of things the hard way. But yeah, I mean that's been a hard learnt thing for me because I can naturally be quite controlling, and like if I think I'm right, I'm gonna like historically I will keep pushing because I know I'm right. Sometimes I'm not right, but yeah, I've had to learn this separation of tasks, this graciousness towards others, and just being patient and letting people be themselves and make the same kind of mistakes I've made. Like that's a really, really hard skill for me. It's been tricky having kids. So my key takeaways from these two schools of thought, and again, I recommend you grab these books. I'm going to point you towards them in a slide or two. But these are the things that have stood out to me. What's helped is learning to look at the situations I'm in with people and be like, okay, where does my responsibility start and end in this relationship or this engagement? And where does theirs start and end? That has helped a lot with my controlling nature, because it's helped me go, anything that's outside of my actual control is not my responsibility. Outside of me offering help and giving advice, it's up to the other person to do with that what they will. Giving, I hope the impression you guys get from me with the time that I do have is that I will give to you guys. When you need something, I get back to you quickly and I try and just help as much as I can. The inferiority and superiority thing is really good if you're someone who battles with anxiety, with depression, with comparison. The inferiority is that weaker part of you that often leads to excuses and self-justifying and avoidance. And so when you recognize that that's happening, try and assess how much of this is valid and what do I need to work on, and how much of this is probably not healthy and not appropriate and I shouldn't even worry about it. And the superiority can lead to arrogance and isolation. And so that's another thing. If you're finding yourself, also as I have, kind of alone and socially isolated, you have to look at how much of that is coming from an inflated sense of superiority. So accept yourself, strive for better, and see others as equals and cooperators in life rather than competition. Again, make the most of what you can control, accept what you can't, be grateful, embrace discomfort, be the man you need, the man you would look up to. Can't chat on that point, Ryan. Also helps treating everything as a learning experience. Yes, so Warren raises a good point. Learn from things, You learn when you respond differently. So yeah, that's a good one, Warren. It took me a long time to learn that. That's a wise way of looking at things. And the last point, I recognize I talk a lot better than I walk. I've still got a long way to go with this stuff. And that's, yeah, I've already talked about the inferiority stuff. So one of my favorite quotes ever by Carl Jung, who's a different psychologist, also very good. You are what you do, not what you say you will do. So for anyone listening to this, anyone listening to the replay, if you get to this point, don't tell me you're interested in losing weight when you don't do what you need to do to lose weight. Don't tell me you're interested in working on your mental health when you don't do anything for it. Or if you want to be fit and strong, but you keep missing the gym. Show or tell me what you want to tell me about yourself through what you do, not what you say. All right, so at the end of this one, I've provided some sort of further readings. I can give people access to the slides if you guys want, so you can go through this. I might do that. I might dump that in the chat. But yeah, on Stoicism, these are a bunch of really good books. Half of these I would love to get my hands on. Meditations by Marcus Aurelius is a really good one, good place to start. Adlerian Psychology, I cannot recommend The Courage to be Disliked enough. That was a really, really good book. It's conversational, so it's easier to wrap your head around, but I quite liked it. And then there's a bunch of online resources for both of these schools of thought if you're interested. But that's pretty much it, guys. That's all I wanted to run by you. So thank you guys for joining in. If anyone has any thoughts or anything they'd like to share, I would love to hear it. I'm glad, Joel. I'm glad that helped in some respect. I'll see you tomorrow, by the way, buddy. Cool. All right. Well, yeah, once again, thank you guys for tuning in. I do hope that was interesting. If you want to jet, feel free to take off. If you want to hang around and chat, also do that. I'll be around for another couple of minutes for people who want to chat.
Thanks, Ryan. Top job.
Oh, thanks, Michael. Hope that helped.
Good on you.
Cheers, mate.
Bye, guys.